It's 6.3 step 1. What is color marking? Color marking is a really good tool to help you start to make sense of a new text in a guided literary analysis or a paper 1 exam. There are 3 basic steps to color marking, and the first is to start with at least 3 different colors. And after reading the poem or the text a couple of times, something specific that you see or think you might see working as a pattern. Things that jump out at you as being unique or unusual. I'll give you a bunch of examples in a sec. Then label each of the 3 patterns that you have traced. The third step is finally to make a literal statement about each pattern. This is something that no one could disagree with. It is true. And then an interpretive statement, one in which you investigate a meaning beyond the literal. So something you would have to support in order to prove, something somebody could disagree with. Okay, so let's talk about some things you could look for as you are color marking. I have a ton of them. So if you don't have enough room in your notes, that's fine. You don't have to jot all of these down. But these are just some different things that might pop up in a new text. You're always going to see parts of speech. This is something I do like to color mark personally. But of course, it does depend on what your guiding question is too. It might not be worthwhile to trace the nouns or the verbs or all the adjectives or pronouns or articles or whatever it might be if you're just looking at imagery. So it's up to you. But this is one thing that I do like to do to help me start to understand a poem is like, who is actually doing the action in each sentence? Like, what is the subject of each sentence? What is the verb? Sometimes poems are tricky to understand literally, and that can actually help you. You might also trace marks of punctuation, especially if you see some repeating marks of punctuation, like question marks or dashes or exclamation marks. How about this one? Words of shape or color or texture. This one would connect to a guiding question about imagery very well. Time or space words. So time words meaning, like Eve in the Easter poem or Easter Monday. Those would all be time words. Space words would be location. Where are we? I'm not talking about like outer space words, but like just location, specifics that show us where exactly we are. How about numbers, people, animals? If these things are repeating, you might want to mark them up. Key sounds, alliteration. Alliteration is when the beginning of words in close proximity are the same, and they are, that's alliteration. Assonance, that's when we have repeating vowel sounds. Consonants, that's when we have repeating consonant sounds. Doesn't matter where in the word they are. Alliteration, it really has to be the beginning of words. Onomatopoeia, that's when the word sounds like what it means. Rhyme, you could trace rhyme if you see this working in your poem. There's lots of different kinds of rhyme. Perfect when it's identical. Every sound after that first syllable is identical. Partial is when a piece of it is. Regular is when, again, where it's perfect. Irregular, it's kind of off. Internal is when you have a rhyme inside of a line, not at the end of a line. Allusions, historical or mythological references. You could trace all of those that are referenced. Weather, how about all of the words having to do with weather, things like rain, wind, dust, sun, shade. Seasons are a good thing to trace if you're noticing them. And you can talk about the cultural significance about seasons. For spring, it's usually rebirth. For summer, it's usually growth, life, happiness, plenty. Fall and autumn is harvest, full of plenty, but then we're also coming to the end of that, approaching scarcity, and winter, which the cultural significance is usually death and sparseness. How about any repetitions? That is a really good thing to trace. Anything that's repeated. Might be a sentence structure, it might be a word. Doubles, where you're noticing two of something. Parallels, symmetry. These are all great things to look for. I like also looking at oppositional pairs. So oppositional pairs are when they are opposing each other. So light versus dark, hot versus cold, static, not moving, versus active, negative versus positive. So these are all some things you could potentially color mark. I would, but go off of this list as well, and just find whatever speaks to you about the text that you could look at as creating a pattern or working in multiple places in the text. Okay, so let's take a look at some examples. This is the poem we dealt with in 6.2, and here we have 3 references to letters. And JS, the student sample we looked at, she talked about the imagery of letters. And so these were the 3 examples of the imagery of letters in the poem. A literal claim, and this is something that you're going to make after you trace the pattern, is a claim that cannot be argued against. It is unequivocal. It is true. So this has to do with analysis mostly, rather than evaluation or interpretation. When you make a literal claim, you're analyzing, you're taking apart an aspect of the text that has some kind of interesting aspect of language, some kind of feature that is formal or technical. In this case, it's imagery. And so here's the literal claim, and you could write this down as an example. The letter in the first line is referenced in the last line of the first stanza. Remember, a stanza is a verse paragraph, right? And the letters that she wrote that he will not get are mentioned in the last line of the poem. So you want it to be something interesting. In this case, it's referencing a pattern, right? Something that comes up 3 times and how that pattern changes. First, it's referenced as the last. Then it's referenced, he is referencing the letters he wants. And then the letters that he will not get, right? So it's interesting. It shows a pattern. It can't be argued against. All right, then if we go to a debatable interpretive claim, this is where we do some evaluation and interpretation. And we think about what is the effect of this technical aspect, this progression of imagery on the poem's meaning. And so here's what the student came up with. The letters convey a feeling of regret because Thomas E.T. did not receive the letters that Farjeon wrote before he died. So this is really evaluation, I think. And, if we were to get to interpretation according to IB rubric, we would say, something else about the larger meaning here, that there is a larger regret that Farjeon is expressing in the correspondence with her friend E.T. But at any rate, this is something we would have to prove. We somebody could debate us you know, and say, well, that's not the feeling that was created because, so this is where you're kind of taking a stab at meaning. And you're, of course, using the text to get you there, but you're going beyond the literal to get to the larger effects, the evaluation, and interpretation. Okay, let's take a look at another one. Here is the imagery of apples and garden life. So silver Easter egg, box of apples, fruit, the egg, garden, sowed our earliest seeds, orchard, apple bud. Here's the literal claim. So this is the one that can't be debated. It is true. The apples are described in the first stanza as E.T.'s favorite fruit, and in the second stanza, the orchard has ripe apple buds. So again, we're looking at something that is a pattern in the poem, and we're also looking at something that's interesting, but it can't be argued against. It is true. All right, what kind of interpretation can we make here? What kind of evaluation can we make? Here's the debatable interpretive claim. The imagery of apples and garden life create feelings of life and happiness turned into loss and feeling purposeless by the end of the poem as they contrast E.T.'s loss of life. So that's interesting. It's really interesting. It's assigning some kind of effect and meaning to the use of this changing imagery, and it's now something that the student would need to support by looking carefully at the text. All right, one last one here for you. References to time and the passing of time. We've got last letter, the Monday before Easter, Easter Monday, such a lovely morning, Eve, Easter Monday, such a lovely morning, earliest Eve. Here's what they came up with. Literal claim, the phrase, it was such a lovely morning, Easter Monday, and the Eve are repeated from E.T.'s letter in the last stanza. So these things are from his letter. These things are the poet taking them and repeating them, but in a different context. And here is the interpretive claim. The repeating of E.T.'s words from his letter in the last stanza create the feeling that Fardeen is longing for the day when E.T. was still alive. All right, so we're getting to the effect of the imagery, the evaluation, the thoughts and feelings that are created, and hopefully to some larger point for writing the piece itself. All right, so I would like you to try this in the text that is in your packet, and I'll make another video that looks at that particular passage and gives you some tips and ideas for color marking it. Good luck with this, and let me know what you need. I have tons of colors in the classroom. There are colored pencils on the counter. You go ahead and just go over and open those drawers and rifle through, find what you need. I've got boxes full of colored pencils as well that I'll grab and have out for you. There are highlighters in the canister in the front table and markers on my table. There's stuff all over the place. So let me know what you need, but grab at least 3 different colors and see what kind of patterns you can find from using the tips in this video. Good luck.